lesson, I don't know if you've looked at it or had a chance to read, it always amazes me when I find new aspects or new things in studies that I've done before, stories I've told, or sermons I've preached. But this one really picks out about the value of solitude and rest as we get caught up in the midst of all the frenzy of life. We always joke that in Baptists, there's always something going on in our service because they don't know what to do with silence. And even in our own lives, I like having something on. If I'm reading or studying, I still want preferably something talking behind me. Sometimes we just need to have that quiet time when we get our act together. So we're going to be looking at a story tonight that you've heard many, many, many times. In the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verses 30 to 45. And we're going to be dipping back into this off and on through the study. But let me share this story with you from the Message Bible. The apostles then rendezvoused with Jesus and report on all they had done and taught. And Jesus said, "Come off by yourselves. Let's take a break and get a little rest." For there was constant coming and going. They didn't even have time to eat. So they got in the boat and went off to a remote place by themselves. Someone saw them going and word got around. From the surrounding towns, people went out on foot running and got there ahead of them. When Jesus arrived, he saw this huge crowd. At the sight of them, his heart broke. Like sheep with no shepherd they were. He went right to work teaching them. When his disciples thought this had gone on too long, it was now quite late in the day, they interrupted. I love how they interrupted Jesus. We are a long way out to the country and it's very late. Pronounce a benediction and send these folks off so they can get some supper. Jesus said, "You do it. Fix supper for them." They replied, "Are you serious? You want us to go and spend a fortune on food for their supper?" But Jesus was quite serious. "How many loaves of bread do you have? Take an inventory." They didn't take long. 5, they said, plus 2 fish. Jesus then got them all to sit down in groups of 50 or 100. They looked like a patchwork quilt of wildflowers spread out on the green grass. He took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, lifted his face to heaven in prayer, blessed and broke it, and gave the bread to the disciples, and the disciples in turn gave it to all the people. He did the same thing with the fish. They all ate their fill. The disciples gathered 12 baskets of leftovers. More than 5,000 were at supper. As soon as the meal was finished, Jesus insisted that the disciples get in the boat and go on ahead across to Bethsaida while he dismissed the congregation. After sending them off, he climbed on a mountain to pray. What's the first thing that jumps out to you in that story? Whether you heard it tonight or just some other time when you were a kid, or is there anything that makes you go, like me saying, they interrupted Jesus?
I think they were anxious because they were doing all this teaching. They were excited. Then as soon as he asked them to kind of perform, they backed off. They were like afraid that they couldn't do it or wasn't going to be able to do it.
And in context, those first verses said they'd been out on their own for the first time, teaching and taking care of people. And they come back, they were excited to come back and tell Jesus all about it. And he says, "Okay, let's get away and talk." And the minute they get away, what happens? The crowd shows up again. I learned a real lesson from this. I'll tell you about it at the end. What do you picture as you read the opening scene in verses 30 to 31? The apostles gathered around Jesus, reported to him all they'd done and taught. Then because so many people were coming and going, they didn't have a chance to eat. He said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." What do you see in that picture? Why were people coming and going? I mean, here's these 12 guys and Jesus. Why does it say there were so many people coming and going? Because anywhere Jesus was, there was a crowd. Anywhere. There was always a crowd. And it wasn't just a quiet crowd. Another part of the story that we sometimes miss is right before this, as they were coming back to Jesus, John the Baptist had been beheaded. John, who'd been one of the early people that had talked about Jesus. So I think that probably had their emotions maybe just keyed up just a little bit more. They were excited, they wanted some time with Jesus, but the crowd was always there. What thoughts or feelings do you have about Jesus' call to the disciples to get away with him to a quiet place and rest when there were so many people needing attention? There's always people needing something, and Jesus says, come on, let's get away and rest. What do you think about that?
I think he knew it was important that they take care of themselves so they could do more.
Sometimes it's hard to step aside when you know there's a lot more that still needs to be done. Sherry wanted to sleep in late today, getting up and doing medicine and coffee and everything, But it's always that there's always going to be something. There's always going to be a crowd. And sometimes when we walk away from those needs and expectations and demands, sometimes we feel guilty. Sometimes we say, oh, I'm over it all. I'm going away, y'all take care of yourselves. 3, what benefit would there have been for the disciples in getting away to rest in quiet with Jesus at that moment? Well, how would it have helped them? What good would it have done for them?
Renew their spirit.
Renew their spirit? So what?
I just said recharge.
Recharge?
And they could also tell them all that had happened without all the interruptions.
And I don't mean this in a bad way, but they could brag on themselves. They could tell them how they'd done, tell Jesus how they'd done. And again, they were the ones who were being trained to go out and complete Jesus' mission. And yet every time they seem to want to get some teaching, some help, the crowd comes in. The crowd comes in. So I'm sure there was some disappointment there. I'm sure there was some possibly irritation there. Also, I'm sure they wanted to talk about John the Baptist. That was Jesus' cousin. Want to talk about what had happened with that. Another benefit that we kind of talked about was they needed to regroup because they'd been giving and giving and giving. There's been a post on Facebook several times about you can't pour out of an empty cup. And so they were needing that encouragement. What value have you experienced in finding a way to get away, if to rest in quiet with rest for only 20 minutes at a time, for rest and quiet time with Jesus? You ever had a time when you just had to get by yourself with you and Jesus? Was it beneficial? Was it beneficial? She's going to be like, oh, of course it was. Like, what do you do? This is kind of a crazy question, but when you feel the need to get alone with Jesus, how do you do it? What do you do? There's no right or wrong.
I got things that have weed, and then I've got time on my phone for contemplation meditation.
Okay, things to read and meditation on your phone. And after that, what else?
I like soft music, just go sit down and no one or nothing but
Some people want music, some people want meditations, some people want other kind of music. When I worked in the psych field, it was always amazing to me when you asked people what kind of music they liked, patients, and what calmed them. There was always one person who said hard rock. And I was like, how does hard rock calm you down? But sometimes it's music. Sometimes it may be water. I love to be by water. There's a little creek runs behind our house, and I don't have to go all the way down to it. We walk in Rudy and just get to where I can see it, and that makes me a very connecting place. I know some people like to come and sit in the sanctuary here. That glass of the quietness and the presence of people's spirit in there. Not on your sheet, but what keeps us from doing that more often? What keeps us from finding that quiet moment, with or without Jesus, but that quiet moment?
Or
Life. Sometimes we think that's wasting time. Sometimes we may think that's wasting time. But if you've gotten to the age most of us are, you've learned if you don't do that, then you really do waste time. You really do. For me, the hard thing is to make my brain be quiet. Because I'll try to get quiet and I'll start thinking about this and 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 about this. Relating to that, huh? And that's when I almost have to, I don't like the word mantra, but I almost have to pick a phrase and make myself focus on that a little bit, pick a verse, pick a line from a song, a hymn, just to make the rest of the sounds be quiet. After a short time alone in the boat, Jesus and his disciples were again swarmed by a crowd. Put yourself in the disciples' place. What might it have been like to witness Jesus' compassionate response to the people? Put yourself in the disciples' place first. When you're in this time, you're talking quietly, you're getting some one-on-one with Jesus, and you look up, and there's a whole other crowd of people. What might their reactions have been? Not again. What else? I think there may have been some Hebrew expletives uttered at that moment. You know, I think too there was with some of them may be an awareness of this is how it's going to be. This is how it's going to be. If you've ever been involved in a ministry, a part of something in a church, sometimes you think nothing else can happen. And it does. And it does. Somebody asked me one time how much my phone rings now compared to before. And I said, not nearly as much. Not nearly as much. But you know, it's still when that phone rings, and we talk about the crazy calls we get, I almost always have to stop and look at it, just in case it is somebody or something I need to attend to. So now they're all fractious, and they're all maybe huffed up and irritated. And they see how Jesus deals with the people. Does he fuss and say, go away, we're having private time here. Come back later. He just starts working with them, talking with them. What would your reaction as a disciple be when Jesus did that? Not what it ought to be. What would your reaction be as a disciple? I think for some of us it'd be, can't you just give me a few minutes, Jesus? Can't they wait? Tell them to talk quietly among themselves for a while and just let us be there. Hopefully that seeing that compassion would lead to their having more compassion. You look at it, you know, the disciples, they were tired, they were hungry, so they didn't have time to eat. Their plans had gotten all messed up. They hadn't had any rest. And you got this big old crowd that's also hungry and before the time's up, tired. I think in our way of looking out, I'd have been afraid that there was going to be some kind of riot breakout or something. You know, when you get a big group of people that are tired and hungry, you've got problems.
My dad an angry mob. That's what I said. My dad an angry mob.
Could have. Because you know, just like today, not everybody that was following Jesus was sweet and nice. You know, we hear the sweet stories for the most part.
But sometimes the hunger is not always for food.
Mm-hmm.
So they may be really just wanting to see and meet Jesus and not have to, you know, they may have not been in the same position as the disciples and not ate all day. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yep, could have been that kind of hunger too.
I just think it'd be very glad.
What happens when you haven't eaten recently enough? What happens?
Go ahead and tell. I get angry. I get very short and I'm like, look, it is way past lunchtime. I need something.
Way past everything.
Okay. I get quiet. I don't get angry, I get quiet. And I get quieter. And after I've been quiet long enough, I can find something to eat one way or the other. You know, but we have a physical and emotional and psychological reaction to being hungry. And the disciples had that as well as the people who were there waiting to hear Jesus. Okay, let's go back into the story again. Put yourself again in the story as one of the disciples, concerned about the crowd getting hungry as it gets late in the day. What anxieties might you have experienced as the story unfolds? Do you realize how late it's becoming? When Jesus tells you to feed the crowd? And all you have to bring Jesus is a few pieces of bread and 2 fish. What kind of anxieties might the disciples have run into?
Facing an
They come-
angry mob.
Hmm?
Worried about facing an angry
Being
mob.
the focus of the angry mob. They come from a culture based on performance. Remember what we've learned about Judaism? You know, good people do good things. So those people who've seen them hanging out with Jesus are going to expect them to do certain things. They're going to expect them to do that. Fear of failure. Fear of failure. Also fear of not being enough. I mean, I've heard all these descriptions about what the fish look like, okay? So we've got 5,000 people. I don't care if you've got the biggest loaf you can imagine, and you got the biggest shark that you can imagine. And that's not what the culture tells us that was. Culture tells us it was a little boy's lunch. A couple pieces of bread, a couple of fish, probably dried fish. Now, I've heard other people say, you know, when they saw the compassion of the little boy, everybody else opened up their picnic baskets and helped feed too. That takes away the miracle for me. You know, I believe, can I explain it? I can't. But I believe that when Jesus blessed those things, they just kept breaking.
Yeah.
They just kept breaking. Some of us experienced when you didn't think you had enough gas, or you didn't think you had enough money, or you didn't think you had enough whatever. And if you let God be in charge of it, it does keep going. So there was that fear of failure. And then another thing caught my eye is, at this point, they'd been traveling around with Jesus for over a year. This was a small enough area that everybody kind of knew everybody. They were put up as the disciples. And now they've got all these people that know them waiting to see what they can do. So there could have been some of that fear of embarrassment too. When people expect you to be able to know what to do. We went to a bowling tournament in Raleigh one time years ago. And I always get lost in Raleigh. And I was lost that night, driving all over the place. Noticed there was this car that kept following us. So we pulled over. This other part of the bowling team jumped out, ran up and said, "Are we almost there?" I said, "I don't know, I'm lost." And they said, "We've been following you, you're the preacher, we figured you knew where to go." You know, so there's sometimes that pressure of, I'm in that role, I'm supposed to perform, I'm supposed to know what's going on.
Don't you feel like they moved the streets in Raleigh?
It was
Streets
awful because
were-
we were there too, and we were lost the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then Jeannie had some friends that lived there, and they tell you how to get somewhere, but it involved going through parking lots and going around apartment parking lots and all this stuff. But anyhow, that's why now I will never go without a GPS. Anyway. Hmm?
I said, that's the way we felt in Charlottesville this weekend.
We just didn't know that the
It's
venue
dark
was
and had
actually
no
on the street it's not really a street, where they
It's
come
kind of
like,
like what Tennessee
you know, so
got that market.
when it was said you were here, I was like, no, we're not here, we're like, there's a parking lot, I mean, we're not here. So finally, we kept going around trying, okay, we're here, no, we're not here.
Don't you love it when the thing says you have arrived and you look around?
Yeah, that's what it's, you know, we haven't arrived, where is it?
So there's those kind of pressures. There's those kind of pressures that they had. And realize again, they hadn't seen that many of Jesus' miracles. But they saw him as the one they were following, so there may be a little bit of anxiety too. Can he really pull this off? Can he really do this? Is this really going to work? What kind of experience have you had with this kind of concern and sense of inadequacy in your own busy life? Talk about that one about trying not to get lost. You ever had somebody at a job think you can do something, but you don't really know if you can? You don't really know if you're going to be able to do that? And especially depending on who it is that asks you. If it's the boss, the big boss, that can be a little more pressure. First time I was ever asked to consecrate communion at MCC, I've been going for about 5 months, 6 months. I was in the back room having prayer. And all of a sudden the pastor looked up at me and said, "I need you to consecrate communion tonight." I said, "Okay." Because Because, you know, I've watched it every Sunday. But I'm telling you, talk about stress. Oh my goodness. I guess I got through it. Nobody threw me out. But you know, sometimes that thing comes. About 3 months later, we were singing the first hymn, and we got to the second verse of the first hymn, and the assistant pastor came up and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "The pastor's sick and can't come. Can you preach tonight?" I said, "You're the assistant." He said, "Oh, I can never pull something together this quick." Well, they knew I'd taught Christian schools, you know, stuff like that. So I said, "Sure." So the next few minutes, and I found a neat little outline from a sermon my pastor at home had preached many years ago that fit just fine. Got up and nobody had a clue that I had just been asked. But again, sometimes we get thrown into situations where it is only God that can get us through it. Only God can give us the right answers or the right words. What does Jesus do for the disciples in response to their distress about the gap in the need and the resources? Jesus sees 5,000 people. He sees 2 loaves, 2 fish, 5 loaves. What does Jesus do?
Tells them to put them into groups.
He starts giving them little tasks, breaking it down. Because, yeah, I mean, overwhelmed. So he tells them to sit them down in little groups. What else does he say?
Bring him what food.
Start shoveling grub. He says, start breaking it up and taking it around. Can you imagine those disciples? And they had that piece of bread, and they go to this first table, and there's still bread. And they go to the next group, and there's still bread. And the next group, I mean, it gives me chills to think about it, what it must have been like. Okay, so now everybody's fed. Hopefully they're happy. Hopefully they've enjoyed their little, you know, sushi treat there. Then what does he tell them to do? What do they have to do after everything's been eaten? Pick up the leftovers. Because in Hebrew thought, and that's the country at this time, bread was the staff of life. You've heard that phrase before. And for Jewish people, they almost always carried a little basket with them because any crumb needed to be picked up. It was that important. Now, I know it's already been in the dirt, it's been in the grass. You still picked it up. You picked up those little things. Now, I've heard that explained that way. They had these little baskets they carried. But I've also been told that the word used for basket is more like a peck. You know what a peck is, a bushel and a peck? The peck a little bit taller than that, and that there was that much left over. Isn't it interesting? How many baskets were there left over? 12. Sounds like they had supper and breakfast the next day too. There's enough still provided for them. As we learned in verses 45 and 46, Jesus did get to a time of solitude, and the disciples did get time apart from the crowd. But how did the disciples get away from the crowd? They got in a boat. They got in a boat. Did they get time with Jesus in the boat? He sent them on off. I'm sure they were just worn out and blown away and, you know, crazy. He sent them on off. And then again, just telling the story gets kind of awesome. They've been there. But then Jesus says, I'm going to dismiss the crowd. Now, some people think that this crowd was so excited about what Jesus had done, they want to seize him and make him king right then. You know, the ATM of food for the rest of their life.
You never know.
But he sends the disciples off, and then what does Jesus do after he dismisses the crowd? He goes away to pray. If the disciples were overwhelmed with giving out, Jesus had been teaching, and then he had seen all this happen, and I like to vision Jesus going around and visiting with the little groups sitting around and eating. He had to go away and pray. I use that term had, because he knew he had to get ready for the next thing. If you know what the next story is, he walks on water. He goes out to those disciples who've just seen this great miracle. And the storm comes up and they're, oh my gosh, we're going to die. You know, and Jesus has to go out to them. So the point of this whole story, the 5,000 get fed, but the point of this whole story is we have to recharge our batteries. We have to find time by ourselves or with somebody or with the Word or with music to replenish. One of the biggest mistakes I made when I was pastor here before is I didn't take vacation. And I made the same mistake when I went to Charlotte. And I just didn't do it because, oh my gosh, could the world spin without me being here? Well, you know what? I've learned it can't. I'm going to be talking to the board next time I have a chance and say, this is what my contract says. This is how I'm going to do it. Because I'm older than I was then, and I want to make sure I can finish out and do what I need to do here. That doesn't mean I'm going to disappear for long periods, but that really hit me with this lesson today. If I'm going to encourage folks to hand the bread out, hand the love out, hand the control and the things that need to be done, hand all that out, then I've got to make sure that I have it in me to do it. Busyness. I know we haven't done the whole 6 weeks that there was going to be of this, but I hope you've gotten some insight into how busyness can cause you problems. So next week we're going to be doing an introduction to the book of Colossians. Talk a little bit about it, talk about what things we might find in it. I encourage you, if you have a chance, I think it's got 4 chapters, to glance over it. The next week we're going to be looking at chapters 1 and 2, what Christ has done for us. And the next week will be Colossians 3 and 4, what Christ does through us. And then we'll do Christmas according to the book of Matthew, Christmas according to the book of Luke, and Christmas according to Mark and John. And toward the end of each of those Christmas ones, we're going to have just little brief thoughts about Advent. Just having a separate night with that. Now, you notice I stopped on the 24th because Rachel and I have been talking. I think she's talked to Rebecca some too. We're going to have a nice little gentle Christmas Eve service. We're thinking it's probably going to be around 6. And so that'll be on a Tuesday, so it'll take the place of this. And the next Tuesday would be New Year's Eve, and where we have yes. Loving God, I thank you that you've brought us together tonight. You've given us an opportunity to see how important it is to find those quiet places, those solitude places. How important it is to realize when we're fractious and frantic and feeling overwhelmed, to know that you have the plan and you understand what's going on. Be with Sue tomorrow, with Wendy next week, and just give us the courage to reach out to one another. Be with Keith as he's trying to get better. In your name we pray. Amen.